Been talking about Liz Truss's mini budget this morning. That's also the talking point of the Labour Party today. It's promised to stop that sort of chaos ever happening again by introducing what's called a fiscal lock. What does that mean?
Well,
fiscal lock?
I'm sure we're about to find out. The party has produced new analysis of mortgage repossession claims, which it says shows the number of families at risk of losing their home shot up by 26%. That, they say, was a result of those financial decisions by the short-lived Prime Minister and her Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng.
Labour Party Chair, good friend of mine, delighted, Anneliese Dodds, joins us this morning. Morning, Anneliese, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Hope you are well as well.
Good here. Yes, the weather looks nice with you. Can you explain a fiscal lock? Because, just put it into layperson's terms.
Absolutely. So what we saw, of course, under that mini-budget that Liz Truss introduced was completely unfunded commitments, in particular totally unfunded tax cuts. That obviously sent our economy into a tailspin, and people who are trying to pay their mortgage right now are feeling the brunt of that. And you just talked about those repossession figures. Now, Labour wants to ensure that could never happen again, that we could never see a rerun of that catastrophic mini-budget. So we have set out those plans for a fiscal lock. What does that mean? That means no unfunded spending commitments, both covering tax cuts, so not saying that you would be cutting tax without explaining how you would pay for that, no unfunded spending commitments as well, again setting out how you would pay for those, and ensuring that you actually have the Office for Budget Responsibility assessing plans properly so that the public can then have confidence that this has been properly thought through. Because, my goodness, that Liz Truss budget was not properly thought through, and many people have paid the price for it, particularly those who've seen their homes being repossessed.
I couldn't agree more, and there is no way on God's earth I would support that tenure and anything. But I would respectfully suggest that the mortgage situation has been going on far too long and can't be nailed entirely at Liz Truss's door. Are we not also talking, Anneliese, that there is a responsibility on mortgage companies and banks who for years were giving out huge mortgages with very little collateral needed and security, and people got behind the eight ball, their houses are repossessed, lots more people are renting. I'm not sticking up for Truss, but I think it's very simplistic to say it's just about her. This is a problem that's been going on in this country too long, which is that people are encouraged or allowed to borrow money they can't afford to repay. And that, I'm afraid, comes down to fiscal organisations, doesn't it?
Well, actually, there's a huge amount that government can and should do and that they haven't done. You talked about renters. Well, unfortunately, the Conservative government has just said it's not going to be banning those evictions, Section 21 evictions, where a tenant's done nothing wrong. That's something the government could have done. Again, it's the government's role to be delivering fiscal stability over time. The Liz Truss government did not do that, and the figures that we've set out aren't about the long-term trend. They're about the change in the trend that we saw immediately following that mini-budget. So not about the long-term trend, but instead about what happened just after Liz Truss's really dangerous mini-budget. And, you know, quite frankly, we've not seen Conservative politicians learning the lessons from this, because Rishi Sunak has set out that huge £46 billion unfunded tax commitment at the time of the last budget. Of course, Jeremy Hunt laying that out to get rid of national insurance. Well, no one knows what they're going to replace it with, or if they're just not going to replace it at all, and then that would be whacking up mortgages further. So we need to see politicians doing what they can do, and I'm afraid the Conservatives have not been delivering on that.
So, Anneliese, just staying with Liz Truss for a second, she's just released her autobiography, and she says on the front page of the Telegraph today, those who say I crashed the economy are either stupid or malevolent. What is your response to that, and will you be reading her autobiography?
Well, I have to say it's not going to be at the top of my Christmas list, that's for sure, but I also think perhaps she's painting her own description in the way that she's talked about those who crashed the economy, because it was very clear, and I remember listening to that mini-budget, it was very clear that it was immediately met with incredulity because of those unfunded promises. There seemed to be no connection with reality when it was set out. And disappointingly, as I said, we've not seen the lessons from this being learned by the Conservative Party. So I think far more humility and responsibility is important from Liz Truss and the Conservatives now, because of course many British families are still paying the price for what they did.
Can I go back to the talks about mortgages and repossessions? I think it's really important, this next question, for people who are tuning in and watching, because we've always said, haven't we, and you've always been great, you've always come on, is the Labour Party had a big job to do to convince people about fiscal responsibility, and we'll talk about the Middle East in a minute. It's all well and good, isn't it, Anneliese, to promise £1.5 million, but we get back at 1.5 million homes. We will always come back to debate about planning. And I love all these MPs who say we need to build more houses, and yet when it comes to that MP's constituency and the constituents say we don't want it here, we can't build more houses unless we change the rules and make sure that maybe there's green belt or whatever. We need to build more houses, but we always shout it from the rooftops and it never happens. What are Labour going to do about that? Because words are one thing. We need more houses in this country.
Well, we do, and that is why we have said we must reform the planning system. We've actually set out plans for a once-in-a-generation series of reforms to the planning system, because we do need change there. We just are not seeing the genuinely affordable homes, and social homes in particular, that we need to see being built. And it's British families who are feeling the impacts of that. And ultimately, this is an area where, yes, there are going to be disputes and discussions about it, but our view is we need to be actually bringing communities into the beginning of the process. We need them to be involved from the start, but we do need to be delivering those homes. You know, Labour said, for example, there's got to be an overall target for house building. Now, Rishi Sunak crumbled in the face of his backbenchers criticising this. He's abandoned that target. Labour said we will have a target. You know, we realise that there will be some criticism of that, but you have to do the right thing in government for the people of Britain, and that's why Labour said we would get Britain building again, and that's going to require some really big changes like the ones that I've just been setting out.
And Anneliese, we saw that Starmer echoed yesterday Rishi Sunak in the House of Commons on much of the rhetoric around the Middle East conflict, but surely a strong opposition party should be holding the government to account and actually challenging their position. Why isn't Keir Starmer doing that?
Well, we need to be doing overall the right thing, above all for our own country's security and that of the international community at a time like the one that we're facing now. These are worrying developments. Of course, we saw that appalling series of drones that were launched at Israel. You know, obviously Labour has condemned that, but now what we really need to see is a de-escalation. We cannot see the development of further conflict, and of course that's what Labour has been urging the Conservative government to be taking forward. We've said to them they need to be making sure that message is conveyed to Israel. They need to be working with the rest of the G7 as well around sanctions. They must be playing a part now to make sure that we do de-escalate, because otherwise I think the impact of that on security is extremely concerning.
I think it's a very interesting development, though, Anneliese. I want to ask you one other question, but just to say about what you've just said. The Labour Party of old would, yes, have talked about de-escalation, but to hear Starmer be as supportive as he was, to hear him talk about how the military is important, is a very different message. Final question. Try and understand where I'm coming from. I know what you're going to say, but I've got to do it. It's my job. Our Ange, right, has not really had to deal with anything bar what's going on at the moment. Can you just explain to me, as the Labour Party chair, why somebody doesn't say to Angela Rayner, who's riding high, you're all riding high, look, love, if you just release the information, right, this is going to go away. Because let me tell you, the press aren't going to let go of this. So don't understand, if she's not lying, why she doesn't just kill this, release the information, and that completely exonerates her, ends the police investigation, and you continue your calm strides towards the general election. Why, Anneliese, is she refusing to do that? Because people think she's lying.
Well, actually, Angela Rayner, I'm sure, will be welcoming the chance to set out the facts. As you said, there is a police investigation now. I mean, I know Angela very well, as you would expect. I've worked with her for many years. She's someone who does the right thing. I've got full confidence in her. And quite frankly, I think there's going to be people watching this. They will know that families come in all shapes and sizes. Families break up. Families get put back together again. That, frankly, is what has happened with Angela Rayner. It's what will have happened with millions of people who ultimately are in our country, who've had that kind of a situation. I just think right now what we're seeing from the Conservatives is an attempt to have a kind of plague on all your houses style of politics, rather than talking about the big issues, like, frankly, the ones that we've just been speaking about in the rest of this interview.
Now, listen, I agree with you, and I'm not trying to be like a dog with a bone, but when she stands up and calls Tory MPs, in her mind, scum, and talks about the way they disrespect and they don't...
Which she apologised for.
Yeah, and I'm just saying, I think, unfortunately, I don't want politics to be like that, right? I want it to be what we've talked about this morning, but it ain't going to go away. Anneliese, seriously, thank you so much indeed for braving the wind this morning there at Westminster.
Thank you,
Anneliese Dodds.